probably most, or at least the beginning part of that career in talent acquisition and recruiting. So I played a big role in the diversity on like the front end of it when
Right.
attracting talents. And it's been really cool to see how that translates into once someone's onboarded, and it has to feed into the rest of the kind of diversity effort. So anyway, yeah, it's a little bit about
That's
me.
cool. No, that's cool. And I like that you started with the talent acquisition part, because I want to start there too. And then we'll kind of progress into some of the really cool stuff that's out there in the world and that you guys are doing as well too. So one of the things, and I just told you guys that this before the show so that you would have a little like time to kind of process that this is actually a thing. I just did a post about this growing trend of companies that are, I really truly think, trying to be inclusive. I really think that's what's happening here. And they're asking on the actual application questions that are sometimes optional, sometimes not. I've actually seen them not even optional, like you have to answer this. And no, I decline to identify or whatever. Asking people's sexuality, asking their specific disabilities, asking if they have kids or a caretaker, asking, are they part of LGBTQIA, all this different stuff. So the very first thing I went to get, and let's start with Javier, because he just mentioned talent acquisition. What is your response to those questions?
Well, first of all, I think there's several like legal implications questions like that. But from like an operational standpoint, I'm not sure what you do with that information from like a recruiting talent acquisition standpoint. Like
why? I get wanting to know that you're getting diverse candidates, right? I get that. Like,
sure.
But do it anonymously or have a different way to do that. I feel like this is just, it's awkward.
Yeah.
I've seen candidates comment that it makes them very uncomfortable and they just click out of the application.
Totally.
And again, the legal implications. So Nicole, you've been around the block and you know all this stuff. What are some of the legal implications for completely misconstruing inclusion this way?
So let me back up. I think probably the goal is they are trying to measure something. Like, we're trying to get more diverse in a certain area within our company. So we want to see how many people that we're attracting that might fit into one of those diversity categories.
Right. I think that's what it is too.
The problem is you can't make hiring decisions based on those things. And you could easily build a case to say, you're discriminating against a certain group because they've answered these questions, it ahead of time. You're choosing whether to call them and interview them or not. So it could get ugly.
Could get ugly real fast. And that's the other thing, is that it's not just that you're making the candidates uncomfortable, you're setting yourself up for lawsuits. Totally. So first of all, please don't do that. Just at the beginning of the show, don't ask nosy questions. As Sydney Ware said on a previous episode in this season, if somebody can say to you, I don't know you like that, that should not be an interview question or an application question.
That's right.
That's a pretty good rule of thumb.
It is. Right. I thought that was genius. I was like, way to go, Sydney. That's like one of my new sayings now. So then I want to kind of dive into, because one thing that I really love that you guys are fantastic about is finding some new diverse ways to source and to make sure that you're attracting diverse talent. So one of you or both of you, take it away and tell us a little bit about how you're doing that without being nosy.
We just hire really awesome recruiters. Our main strategy.
Thanks for the shout out. But you guys do. You found some technologies, things like that. So what are some of the kind of tools that you use for doing that?
Yeah. So one of my favorite tools right now is this little platform called Hired, or hired.com. And they're essentially a marketplace where, as opposed to LinkedIn Recruiter, where you could reach out to 100 people and 100 people don't want to hear from you and they'll let you know. On Hired, they opt in and they basically say, hey, I'm looking for a position, or at least I'm interested in hearing from hiring managers and recruiters. So they're a lot more receptive. But from the diversity standpoint, they actually have filters where you can start filtering from a diversity standpoint, so that you can like check this little box and it'll bring people up who self-identify as a in a diverse group. So
they do. And they do it very generally. I want to specify
Mhm.
that too. Like, you're not saying I want to hire LGBTQA or I want to hire a
Right.
Black person or whatever it is. It's
Yeah.
very generalized,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
diverse people.
Yeah, I think
That's it.
on the candidate side, I'm pretty sure it's as simple as that. Like, do you consider yourself a diverse candidate? Yes or no? And if yes, then they'll filter you to the top. You can also blind it, right? So you can check this little toggle and it'll remove the candidate's picture, and really they try to like names for the most part, like
Yeah,
really
they do a
anything
really good
that,
job.
yeah, really anything that will like identify you as you know, belonging to a certain group. That way there's some like level set where I'm not basing it off of where I think you're from or what your gender is. It's purely based off of your resume and your skill set.
And you know, I love that. I literally designed a whole technology around that. So I absolutely love that they're doing that. There's also Junco. There's Jobs for Humanity. That's another one that you guys could use, by the way. They have a whole database of candidates that are in different groups, like neurodiverse, all of that. They also have companies in there that welcome those candidates, that say, yes, we want people that have neurodiversity, cultural diversity, religious diversity, whatever it is, so that it's good for the candidates and the job seeker, and the company that's hiring.
Mhm.
So Nicole, when you were building out these processes and, you know, kind of helping to guide your team on this mission for diversity and inclusion, what are some things that you set out to make sure that you did and did not do in the hiring process?
Good question. Well, one of the things that I thought was, like number one is identifying areas of the company where we wanted to see more diversity. So you have to have data to do that, right? You want to look at your data. And then you want to focus in and say, like, gosh, we are not seeing a lot of diversity in a tech team or a leadership team. So first you have to identify what you want to go after to make sure you've got diversity and thought on that team. And then, once you have that, you got to start measuring your progress and making sure that, everything that you're building out. Because one thing that Javier and I talk about a lot is you're not going to get diverse candidates to a hiring manager if you're not being intentional about it, right? Like,
Right.
it's not going to happen if I don't give you a slate that has diversity in it. They're only interviewing who we're giving them, right? They're
Absolutely.
not, yes, they're not outsourcing. So we really, be clear about what you're going after so that you can be targeted and that you're measuring your progress, you're measuring your sources, which sources are working, which sources aren't working, and then making sure that those slates that you're giving your hiring managers have the right diversity on it.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that you're tracking the sources, because there are certain sources that have just not been, I don't think it's intentional, but they've just not been very careful with their algorithms. And so you just get a whole bunch of white people, like when you source.
Yeah.
And it's like 3 or 4 pages later, okay, here now we're getting to some diversity. And a lot of men will pop up more quickly on some of those. So it's very important to track your source, make sure. I also love that you guys gathered all this data, you put all this effort into finding the diverse groups, but still somehow you've managed not to just have utter tokenism, which is actually pretty impressive. I've seen people like, we'll only hire a woman for this role, or we'll only hire, XYZ, whatever it is. And so I like that you guys somehow, that your company and your team somehow made a point of, yes, we're going to target this, but we're also not going to only hire for this. We still want to get the right human. And I think that's super important. A lot of people miss that step. Like, we still need to make sure we have the right human, whomever that is. And Javier, I wanted to ask you about this because you have some of the best questions for your hiring.
Yes.
I'm loving this anticipation.
You hear me?
Now we do.
Now we can hear. Sorry, it's the construction. It's hateful. I'm telling you, they need to quit building houses around me.
Oh no.
Wow. Why don't you talk about the questions?
Which questions are we referring to?
The thoughtful ones.
Ah, yes. Got plenty of
Um,
those.
whenever you are going in and trying to understand the job and what it is that they're looking for, what are
Mhm.
some of those questions that you use to kind of better understand the role?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like during the kickoff meeting or the intake meeting with the hiring managers. Yeah, some of them are really standard questions that I think like a bunch of us are using in the TA industry. Like, uh, what are the nice to haves versus the must haves? Like, what does a candidate have to have, or we're going to turn them away, and what's the cherry on top, or what is the title, what is the team structure, just kind of general things that I think most candidates would like to know about.
Right.
But then we'll get into things like job responsibilities. What is a day to day might look like, or
The day to day. Mhm.
yeah, or we'll get into um, I think I already mentioned team structure, but like who are they reporting to? Who else is on the team? Where do they fit into it? Um,
You really just you dive deep into all of that though. I've heard you. You just kind of like just go like they'll try to give you some general like, blow off answer. And you're like, no. I need to know day to day. But one of the smartest things that I think that you asked, and I'm not going to get the wording right, so please feel free to correct my wording on this. But it was along the lines of what are the things that they need to be aware of that may not be so positive about the
oh
role.
yeah,
Yeah.
That
yeah.
was the smartest thing, I think. And I loved how you would worded it to them, because it was like, okay, we know not every role is perfect. So
Mhm.
what's going to be the thorn in their side so that we can prepare them for this
Yeah. Yeah.
to make sure that it's something that works.
I view that as like two sides of the same coin, because I'll ask them what's something that they're going to love about this, like, and then the other side of that is like what's something that's probably going to frustrate them, and
Right.
usually it'll come down to things like processes. We're a startup company, and so we don't have everything defined, and so there's some ambiguity, and that can be a little frustrating.
And
um,
that's important for inclusion, because there are some people that they cannot function with that. That is
mhm.
just not within their wheelhouse. And then there's some people like me that thrive with that.
Yeah,
So that is a
organized
very
chaos.
important, yeah. And it's good organized chaos, I will say.
Yeah.
But that's very important to help people understand. I think in general, not just for
Mhm.
diversity candidates, but for everybody. I think that's really important, good questioning. So kudos on that,
Thank
first of
you.
all. You're welcome.
Yeah, I think it's also important for hiring managers to identify, right? Because I think a lot of times
Right.
we have hiring teams that go in and like, we're perfect. We're this amazing team, amazing company. And I think it's a good level set of like, hey, like there are great things about us, great things about your team. There are some things that are going to be frustrating. So you have to keep that in mind when you're interviewing people.
Yes. And I love the idea of letting people know that up front. Like I said, I think it builds a stronger candidate relationship. It gets you the right
Totally.
people moving forward. I think that's absolutely genius. So then kind of back to you, Nicole, talking about, your process. So you guys are wonderful. Your whole team is really great about making sure that the candidate is getting touch points, that you use your tools, that things are being automatically set up, all of that. But you're also wonderful about the accommodations and when people ask about things. So what are some of the guidelines that you would recommend companies use when, okay, you need to have a standard process, right? That just makes sense. And consistency was very important in the interview process. So how do you make sure that you have consistency, but also room for accommodations?
Yeah, I mean, we have one wonderful thing working for us, and that's that we're a remote culture, right? So, and a remote culture is a wonderful culture for people with physical disabilities as well, because
Absolutely.
we have a little bit more equal access to a spot to interview, for example. But I would say just more generally, we have a process. It is consistent, but we're not so rigid that we're not willing to flex things if people need things flexed.
Right.
And Javier could probably talk about maybe more specifics around instances that he's seen where someone has asked for an accommodation, but having the process and knowing where you can make those tweaks to it is what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you do need to have the consistency because that's part of inclusion and making sure you're having a fair and equitable hiring process, and also just a smart hiring process. Because if everybody gets a different interview, it's not going to work out.
It's common sense. It's exercise of common sense. Yeah.
Common sense is not so common, though, tragically. It's just true. It's just true. But one thing actually I experienced when I was not only going through your interview process, but also after I started working with your team, was an incredible flexibility for one of my more prevalent conditions, which is my seizure disorder, which will cause facial tics and all of that. So I can't always be on camera. And the team was never funny about that. Never flinched when I said I'm going to be off camera today. I think even, in fact, I don't remember which one of you it was, but one of you that happened during my interview and I turned off my camera, and it was no big deal. It was just like, oh, okay, well, no big deal. Just kept on with the conversation. And there was never nosiness of probing or anything. It was just, are you okay? Okay, fine. On we go. And here it is. And so, first of all, I want to commend you on that, because that's one where it would scare a lot of people. And it has in the past scared a lot of people away from me. So when something like that comes up, and I'm going to start with you, Javier, because you dealt with it the most when I was working with you. What are some of your thoughts about how and why to be inclusive with conditions like that?
How and why? Okay. Well, starting with why, I think I definitely subscribe to the ideology that diverse groups are just more effective groups, right? When you have different ways of approaching problems, processing information and data, and executing, you just have better results because you have just so many options to choose from. And how, I think, applicationally, there are just so many options. There's so many tactics, but I think when it comes down to the root of it, it's caring about the individual instead of caring about so much the results or kind of what we consider normal. So in a remote setting, it's normal for everyone to cameras on, unmuted, and we're all present in a meeting. But like you were saying, sometimes that's just not plausible. And not even for disabilities. I have a toddler that'll just kick down my door randomly and come in with my dog. And sometimes I have to mute real quick as he's telling me about his fruit snack heist from his
We're asking
mom.
You to try his ice cream. I was present for that one. Yes. That was adorable.
One time I had a one-on-one with Nicole, and he was literally climbing on me almost through the whole thing. And so things happen, right? This is just a part of our life now, whether it's a disability or family or some sort of, mental health crisis. These things happen. And I think it's really important to keep yourself rooted in the fact that these are individuals, these are people.
Yes. I mean, that's the basis of inclusion, right? It's having empathy. It's having empathy for each other. It's having empathy for the candidates and their experience and the fact that they're nervous as heck and they don't know what you're going to ask, right? And that they might need a pause or some silence to gather their thoughts without judgment. And honestly, internally and externally, it's about having empathy and really understanding, putting yourself in the other person's shoes.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned the pauses, because both on the interviewer and the interviewee side, there's always some hesitance, it seems like, around that. And there doesn't need to be. So I always encourage people as I'm doing trainings to say, hey, by the way, if you're the interviewer, to say, just so you know, any questions, if you want to circle back to them, that's fine. If you need a moment to think about it, please take that. I am not in a rush today. Feel free to just, ponder this, because you're right. They don't know what you're going to ask. And one of my biggest things I talk about all the time is it's our job to be good at interviewing, not theirs. Unless you're hiring a recruiter, they don't need to be good at interviewing, or maybe a hiring manager. They don't need to be good at interviewing. That's not their job. So who cares? Just make sure that they can do the job that they're supposed to do. That's the whole thing, especially with some neurodiversities. It can get, the interview style can be very different. So I wanted to ask you about this too, because this is something that I have heard a lot, and there's a lot of different thoughts on this. a lot of different directions that people feel very strongly about. So you work within a tech company. And of course, people always talk about the IT personality and that type of thing, which does have some truth to it. I would put that out there. There is a reason that that's a stereotype. But when you're interviewing and someone presents with, the IT personality, is that something that you can see, not that I know that you don't do this, but that you can see that other people discriminate against? Is it something that you maybe have an inclination of, oh, this person, or does it cause what they call a positive but negative bias, which is where, you think, oh, great, this person will be good for the job. They kind of fit into that role just because they have this neurodiversity that makes them present a certain way. So is there a time when maybe, you're noticing something and you kind of push them on because of it, but it's so positive bias? I'm just curious. Do you ever see that? Not necessarily in yourselves, but just in general in hiring. Is this something that you've seen? Like, oh, this person or they're in sales. Oh, they're super hyper. They're ADHD. They'll be great in sales. That kind of thing. Is this something that either of you has seen very much of?
Yeah, I think in some roles you can see that, especially like that example of sales. I think we have this like typical, like, this is a salesperson, and if they match that, then they'll probably be good at it. The opposite end, though, like the IT personality, I think I've seen more negative, like turning people away for it because they're not a culture fit, whatever that might be, right?
Yes.
So I think a lot of teams will hide behind like, oh, they're not a culture fit because it was kind of awkward talking to them, right?
Nicole, you have so many opinions about that, so let's have them. Let's have your opinions.
I mean, like culture fit and gut feel and all of these things that people really rely on when they can't or don't want to put exactly like what's happening to that is like just this blanket that people hide behind. I mean, culture fit, if your culture is defined, you should be able to say what specifically it is that candidate doesn't have, that your culture does, and why it would be a problem.
Right.
Or like, I just have a bad feeling or a gut feeling, like examine that. And if it does, like, you can't come up with a reason, then you just can't use it. It's just it's non-information.
Right.
I mean, who knows? You could have had a bad experience with a neighbor who was wearing the same shirt or whatever. And yeah. So that true gives you a bad feeling.
I legitimately had a bias against Mallory's. People named Mallory for a while. I had 2 bad Mallory's in a row. And like every Mallory after that, I was like, I don't want them. And so I had to train myself out of that because it had just created this awful, icky feeling inside of me. And so, but you do have to be careful about that because you're right. It could literally be anything. You don't like their hairstyle because it reminds you of some person that you disliked, or maybe a mannerism. Yeah, literally anything. You have to be so careful with that. I read an interesting article at one point on bias in resumes and how different colors and different fonts would elicit biases in people. It's crazy. So you have to really, again, back to resumes. Yes. Yeah, don't do that.
Well, and from like a TA standpoint, what am I supposed to do with that? Right? Like, there's no culture fit. Like, okay. So what do I have to change to not find this person again?
Right. It's completely impractical.
Right.
Aside from not being inclusive, it's also just non-informational. It's just not helpful. So then after they're onboarded, so this is where I have felt that your team particularly shines. Is, I mean, wonderful during the TA process. Don't want to take away from you there, Javier, but it's after they come on. You have developed some wonderful things, and you've even had some uncomfortable trainings where people, when I say uncomfortable, I mean it from the standpoint of very honest diversity and inclusion trainings, things like that. So Nicole, talk to us a little bit about some of the efforts you're doing, what you found works and what you found does not.
That's a big bucket of stuff.
I know. Sorry.
I think it comes down to building relationships, number one. And you have to be intentional when you're in a remote company. So it's very easy to come in as a new hire and you talk to your boss and maybe you go to a team meeting once a week, but then what about everybody else? Like, how do you become part of the fabric of the overall company. And so, I say that it's a million tiny things. There's not one thing to put my finger on. It's a million tiny things. It's making sure that someone on the HR team is reaching out to them and saying hello. It's making sure that they are going to team day, which is a thing that we do every week, where everybody in the company gets together. We learn some company information. We have some fun too, get in some breakout rooms, do some silly stuff. You know, you're through all of those little interactions, you're building relationships with people.
Yes.
You know, so it's really, really hard for me to point to one thing.
Y'all do so much.
That we do. Yeah. I mean, inviting people to be part of what we call our ERGs, employee resource groups, or affinity groups. So making sure that at hire, they know about these, they know where to go to participate. They're invited by other members. And, you know, they can go and just listen. They don't have to be an active participant, but, you know, making sure that there's lots of avenues for them to be themselves at work and kind of live into our values.
Absolutely. And I love you do a lot of poll taking and surveys and anonymous so that people feel comfortable, and they give you honest feedback, and then you listen. I've sat there in the meetings and listened to you discuss, okay, this is the feedback we got. This is how we're going to adjust. And it's that adjustment that I think is so very important. We have a question. So do you use any journaling exercises or any other processes to help uncover and explore your biases? That's a good one. Yeah. I have my personal answer, but Nicole, what's your answer for the company?
Well, I think we use some journaling through some of our training and education that we've done. So we recently did 2 sessions with a company called Life Labs Learning, which is really awesome. By the way, it's live instruction, so it's kind of workshop feeling. But we did one for all of our hiring managers, which includes the talent acquisition team, HR team, any hiring manager, or anyone that does interviewing. And they go through a process of uncovering what biases they might be bringing with them to an interview. And there's some workshopping around that. And then we did the same thing for the whole company, because, you know, let's say we have a team that we're focused on that doesn't have any women, for example. And we now go out and we're making a concerted effort to make sure we're sourcing and bringing women into the pipeline. What happens when they show up on day one?
Right.
If that team's not prepared to think about how they run meetings or how they communicate with each other or what's their team culture, will it feel exclusive? So the training for the whole team was also a workshop like that too. So I don't know if that answers the question about journaling specifically, but you know, there were
it's just other processes. Yeah, it's the processes of understanding your biases. For me, I have different processes to track my biases. So I've actually done exercises to train my brain to recognize when I'm having a response that's not necessarily based. So like you said, the actual informational. So, okay, there's a reason I'm responding to this information, or, oh, I'm just kind of randomly having this yucky feeling. Okay. And then stop and go, okay, why is that happening? And then I can kind of work on it. I have known people that journal. Javier, what are some things that you do to keep your biases in check?
Yeah, I think I follow something really similar to you, because and that Life Labs training was actually really helpful because it got into specifics, where I think you have some diversity trainings that are just generalized, right?
Right.
And it's hard to take something that's applicable and like put it into what I'm doing today and tomorrow, right?
Right.
And so I think that was really valuable part of that training. But to your point, I think it's really valuable to be able to identify like, I'm feeling this certain way. One example that I typically give is I have been terrified of mispronouncing people's names in home screens, right? And I would feel bad about it, and I'd feel awkward being like, how do you pronounce your name? And I'm just that dumb white guy, I guess. And I realized that's probably like a part of my bias. And so now when I'm worried about pronouncing someone's name, I'm like, I'm going to call them.
Just call them. Just ask.
Just ask.
Just dive in.
No one has ever been offended. No one has
Hey, it's a new greenhouse feature now too, by the way, where they record their name when they're applying.
Oh, I love that.
You can play it before you reach out to them.
That's cool. Yeah. Yes. That's cool. I like that. I've also seen where they can phonetically spell it out, a field where they can phonetically spell it out for you. That helps a whole lot. It's the same basic idea, but it really helps. It does. And you have to sometimes overcome that fear and kind of get over those hurdles. So another thing that I see a lot is this insistence that people be part of the culture. And what I say by that is there's no room for the people that maybe they don't like small talk and they don't like to do, big group activities and things like that. So Nicole, what are some of your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with this and we'll probably continue because our company is scaling. And when we were really small, we'd get on these team days, right? And we would all be in a room together, cameras on, and ask a question of the day. And question of the day could be anything silly or serious. And everybody would go around and answer. And you could immediately tell like who was uncomfortable with that. And so we grow, and now we're too big to be in one room, and we go in multiple breakout rooms because that started to feel safer for people to be in a room of only 8 people instead of 58 people or 85 people. And then at some point we heard feedback like, hey, we've got a lot of introverts that work here and they want to participate in something, but they don't necessarily want a speaking role in that. And so, we incorporate these lightning talks where we allow somebody to come in and present on something they're passionate about, and you're listening, and you can type in questions or you can ask them live. And, icebreakers at the beginning of meetings, those are often uncomfortable for a lot of people. So thinking about like, you're making people stand up and do the chicken dance. Like, does that really feel good?
Wait a minute. Wait. I am just picturing example. I am just picturing like 85 people on Zoom just doing the chicken dance right now. That's just...
Well, we don't do that. We don't do
no,
that.
I know you don't. No.
But and there's allowing people to opt out. If somebody turns off their camera, for a moment, allow them to just opt out. They're there. They want to be part of it, but they're not comfortable in that moment. Allow them to opt out and don't poke at it,
Exactly. I love that. And actually one of the things that you do on the people team meetings, I don't know about some of the other meetings that I really, at first I was like, why are we doing this? But then I really got to where I enjoyed it, was the colors. So they'll say, what color are you? And it's green to red, just like the traffic lights. So green, yellow, red. And you talk about just how you're doing. And it's just a way to express how you're doing. And you can elaborate, not elaborate, whatever it is, but it just kind of is a good, and I know that you guys would let people opt out. None of us ever did, but I know that you would. But it was a great way to just kind of let your team know this is how I'm doing. And this is an emotional check-in. And it was a really cool, it just kind of made you feel connected to the other people and to know how the other humans are doing and where they might need help. Maybe they're having a bad day and you can reach out and help them a little bit more. And I thought it was a really cool, really, really cool tactic. I gotta say, I was surprised. That's the kind of thing I would think is super cheesy. And then I did it and it was awesome. So, I just want to say that.
Thanks for saying that. A lot of our teams use it, including our executive team uses it. And the cool thing about it is you walk into a meeting and everybody's either yellow or red. That's not a good day to make decisions. You don't want to make decisions on that day.
That's a good point.
And that might even be a meeting where you give people time back, because you've got a room full of red and yellow people who are highly stressed about something personal or professional or some combo of the two. Like, maybe it's not a good time to meet in general. So I think it does temperature check to say, like, how is the rest of this meeting going to go and what direction should we move?
It absolutely does. I remember when the Roe v. Wade reversal happened and our team has much darker colors on those days. And you're right. It made a difference. And it gave opportunity for other people to support each other. And it gave an opportunity to go, okay, this isn't the time to do some of this stuff because it's going to go a very sideways direction. So we are way over time, but I had to keep talking to you guys.
It flew by. You're right.
I love that. So we had another comment. We've had a few in support, but they said, that's so smart. No decisions when red and yellow. It's a genius way to start a meeting. I'm telling you, it really kind of sets the tone and lets you know how it needs to flow. So final thoughts. We're going to just do rapid final thoughts. Javier, when you're thinking about inclusion and HR work or talent acquisition, what are some of your thoughts that you just need to share with the world?
Yeah, I think my final thought is before working with Nicole, my approach to diversity was, we're not going to make any hiring or promotion or really any decision because based off of like a protected class, right? So we're going to hire someone regardless of their, gender, religion, race. And then Nicole actually taught me that concept of if we're not intentional about something, meaning we're tracking data, establishing a baseline, being intentional about moving the needle on that, and then tracking results, then we're not going to see a difference. And so I think a big thing for me is like, don't be afraid to change your perspective on what diversity is and what that means to apply it, right? Because of those little changes and because of taking that advice from Nicole, I think we've seen big changes here at Syncro, and I'm super proud to have been a part of those changes.
That's awesome. All right, Nicole, next.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about preparing the organization and focusing on the culture, because all of those things won't work if once they get inside of an organization, we're not ready to receive. And so for me, it's about being authentic and just being yourself. Just be yourself. Professional does not mean robotic. I think from a young age, we were all taught like you have your work self and your personal self, and work doesn't have to be robotic. You can spend time talking about like nothing and you're doing something, you're building a relationship, and so I just think building that empathy is such an important part of having an inclusive workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And my final thoughts on it are two main ones: is inclusivity cannot be exclusive. So, and this is something else that your team did beautifully, is when somebody comes to you and points out, hey, this is exclusive, be open to pivot. And you can't say, well, we're going to be inclusive for these people, but not for these people. That's not inclusivity. That's picking and choosing. So inclusivity cannot be exclusive. And then the other thing is, and very much to both of your points, be willing to grow and be willing to pivot. That's part of inclusion. You're going to think you have it right, and then something new will come up, or you'll just learn a whole new way, an exciting way to do something. Be constantly open to change and growth. Those are the final thoughts. Thank you both so very much for coming on today. If anybody out there wants to work for the best company in the United States and Canada, go talk to one of these two lovely humans. If you want to learn more about their product at Syncro, which is a wonderful they're a multi-service provider. They're an MSP. If you want those services, definitely reach out to the company. I highly recommend them. And thank you all. Same time, same place next week. Have a wonderful weekend.